Imagine a silent room where candlelight moves gently across damp stone walls. The sound is small, like a breath being held, and in the middle of that stillness lies an old wooden table covered in dust as thick as a finger. Upon it rests a massive book bound in dark leather, its surface cracked like dry earth waiting for rain. The air around it feels heavy, not because of moisture, but because of something unseen, something that makes anyone who comes near feel watched by pages not yet opened. Here is where we begin tonight's journey, a journey that requires no courage, only the willingness to listen quietly. Find the most comfortable position you can. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing grow long and soft. There is nothing to chase, nothing to fear. The world outside can wait. What we face tonight are merely old pages that have waited centuries to be found again. This book is called Codex Gigas, known in legend as the Devil's Bible. Yet tonight, we will not accuse nor seek demons behind the ink, but simply try to understand how a human could create something so vast, so silent, and yet so alive. This book is real. It is kept in the National Library of Sweden, enclosed in thick glass, and only a handful of people are allowed to touch it. It weighs more than 75 kilograms, stands nearly a meter tall, and its pages are made from animal skins boiled, dried, and stretched one by one. Scholars estimate it took about 100 donkey hides to make the entire manuscript. Inside are the Bible, medical texts, calendars, spells, prayers, and even a history of Bohemia. But what makes it different is not merely its content, but the silence and fear surrounding its creation. Legend tells that it was written by a monk who broke his monastic vows and was condemned to be sealed alive within a stone cell. In despair and terror, he vowed to create a book containing all human knowledge to redeem his sin. But as the night deepened and time ran short, he realized the task was impossible. So he called upon a power that was forbidden to name. In a single night, the book was finished. At its center, on a vast page devoid of sacred text, stands a portrait of the devil, staring with hollow eyes, as if greeting anyone brave enough to open it at midnight. Yet this story, like all legends, cannot be proven. No name of the monk remains, no official punishment recorded, no signature at the final page, only ink that refuses to fade, and an image too vivid to forget. Modern scholars have studied every page, finding that the entire text might have been written by a single person. The ink pressure, the letter forms, the rhythm of the handwriting all are consistent. Whoever the author was, he must have spent 20 or 30 years of his life creating this one book. Tonight, we will not argue about whether the legend is true or false. We will simply let our imagination drift through the cracks of time. Perhaps, amid the sound of candlelight and the scratching of a quill upon stretched skin, there is something more than writing. Perhaps this book is not a curse, but the testimony of a human who longed for eternity, who feared being forgotten, who wrote not for the world, but for himself. Breathe slowly and imagine yourself sitting before the book. Feel the chill of the glass case. Imagine your hand almost touching the hardened leather. There is a faint scent-told dust, dried ink, and something unnameable, perhaps time itself. This book has survived kingdoms, wars, fires, and a long journey from Bohemia to Sweden. It has been hidden, looted, and saved. Yet in every passage, no one truly knows if what moved was merely paper or something more delicate, something that also watches from behind the letters. Tonight, we seek no answers. We only listen, because sometimes mysteries are not meant to be solved, only accepted like the sound of rain on a roofer, arriving without reason, leaving without explanation. Let yourself drift in this silence, in this story that does not wish to be completed. The book may be lifeless matter, yet within its quiet pages, something listens back. The year 1229 is often mentioned as the time when Europe slowly transformed from the silence of monasteries to the restless age of knowledge. In the land of Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic, stood a small Benedictine monastery in Podlavas. It was modest, almost hidden among forests and fog-covered valleys. The monks lived in quiet order, their days measured by the tolling of bells and the lengthening of shadows on stone walls. There are few records of their lives, except for one. From that silence came a book so vast that it would later become one of humanity's most enigmatic creations. At that time, Europe was ruled by both fear and faith. The Church held spiritual and moral authority. Nobles controlled the land, and the common folk lived under the shadow of the cross. Yet beneath this surface of piety lay inner struggles few would ever know. In remote monasteries, scribes labored late into the night, copying sacred texts letter by letter with trembling hands numbed by cold. Every mistake could bring punishment. Every blot of ink could be seen as sin. In such a world, silence was a companion, and perhaps within that silence, something darker waited. There is no record of who wrote Codex Gigas. No monk is named, no commission documented. Yet in the monastery's chronicles lies mention of a monk punished for breaking ecclesiastical law, man said to have been too curious, too eager to know what was not permitted. His sentence was lifelong imprisonment, but before death came, he begged for a chance to redeem himself. He vowed to write a book containing all human knowledge, from the Word of God to the secrets of the world. The story grew from document to legend. On his final night, the monk is said to have written without rest, but as dawn approached and his strength failed, he realized he would not finish. In despair, he called upon a power that was not to be named. When morning came, the monastery found the book complete, so perfect, so immense, as if written by something not human. At its center, on a page without scripture, stared the image of the devil, a warning, perhaps, or a signature. Modern historians have tried to trace its origins. Based on analysis of the handwriting, ink, and parchment, Codex Gigas is believed to have been created between 1200 and 1230. Its author was likely a single monk who worked for more than 2 decades. Yet the most puzzling aspect is not its perfection, but its consistency. No major errors, no missing letters, no sign of multiple hands. The author seemed possessed by unnatural calm and endurance. Bohemia itself was a strange land at the time, a meeting point of Christian mysticism, early science, and lingering pagan belief. In its forests, people still spoke of spirits guarding rivers and trees. In its towns, scholars debated medicine and astrology. The world seemed poised between darkness and enlightenment, and amid that transition, a book appeared that contained both. Codex Gigas includes not only the Bible, but also medical treatises, astrological charts, necrologies, and exorcism texts. It was an encyclopedia of the medieval world, a map of human knowledge pressed into a single monumental object. Yet the question remains, how could one man write it alone? Why place a portrait of the devil among holy words? Why leave no name, no mark of authorship, no prayer of closure? Some scholars claim the image of the devil is moral allegory, not invocation. Others insist it is the trace of a real pact. Under the illustration, the ink grows darker, denser, its composition different from the rest. Under a microscope, it reveals metallic particles unseen in other inks of the same century. Scientists call it coincidence. Believers call it evidence. If you stand before Codex Gigas today, you see more than parchment and ink. You see obsession made visible. Its lines are straight, even on uneven hide. Its illuminated letters glow red and blue like fire beside water. There are blank spaces that no one can explain, pages that seem to wait for something to be added, or perhaps something that was erased. The monastery of Pedlavis no longer stands. Its ruins have faded into the earth, but the name endures, as if the soil itself remembers the monk's footsteps. Perhaps, among the moss and roots, a trace of ink remains. And if the night is quiet enough, maybe the air there still whispers, in a language known only to one man. The writer whose name was never spoken, and who perhaps never truly died. In the confusing years between the 13th and 14th centuries, in the heart of Bohemia, surrounded by gray forests and rocky hills, stood a monastery called Pedlavis. Not large nor grand, yet it held an unnatural stillness. Among its fading red bricks, time moved slowly, as if even the air hesitated to pass through. The monks who lived there were known for their silence, their discipline in copying sacred texts from dawn until nightfall. But within one cold and dimly lit room, behind a tightly locked wooden door, a monk named Hermann was imprisoned without mercy. Old chronicles refer to him as Hermanus Monachus, a man who had broken the vow of silence, or perhaps committed a sin too heavy to confess. No one knew his true crime, only that his punishment was cruel. He was condemned to write a single book that would atone for his sins in one night, a book containing all human knowledge from creation to the end of time. Should he fail, his body would be sealed within the monastery's stone wall, becoming part of the silence he had once disturbed. Hermann, trembling, accepted the task. In a room lit only by a single candle, he laid out sheets of animal skin, sharpened his quill, and stared at the mossy stone ceiling. Outside, the winter wind whispered, carrying the scent of wet earth and burning wood. Time passed without sound, save for the scratch of the quill across parchment. He wrote the story of Adam and Eve, the history of kings, the laws of heaven and earth. Every line flowed like a slow breath toward his own fate. Yet when midnight arrived, the ink in his pot began to dry. His body trembled, his eyes grew heavy, and consciousness faded like melting wax. He knew it was impossible to finish in a single night. In desperate surrender, he knelt and prayed not to God, but to something else, something that listened from the depths of silence. He begged for strength to complete the book, offering whatever remained of himself in return. When the prayer ended, the dying candle flared brighter. The air turned metallic cold, and a faint sound came from the dark corner. Ancient records describe it only in one strange sentence. That night, he wrote with a hand that was not his own. Morning came, and when the monks opened the door, they found Hermann alive beside a colossal book. It weighed over 100 kilograms, nearly an arm's length thick, made entirely of smooth, dark leather. Inside, it lay the entire world's knowledge: sacred scriptures, medical treatises, astronomical calendars, Roman laws. Yet at its center, among the elegant handwriting, was an image that froze the blood of anyone who looked at it. A massive figure with 2 horns, a tongue extended, and eyes staring outward. The face was not drawn like a symbolic depiction, but like a portrait, as if the artist had seen the being with his own eyes. Silence fell upon the monastery. The monks knelt and prayed, while Hermann sat before his creation, neither proud nor broken, perhaps both. Soon after, he vanished from history. Some claimed he was sealed within the walls, as threatened. Others said he left, carrying a fragment of the book's secret with him. The book became known as the Codex Gigas, or the Giant Book, named for its immense size and inexplicable origin. Modern scholars have tried to calculate the time required to write it, and the results are astonishing. If a single scribe worked without rest, the manuscript would take more than 20 years to complete. There are no errors, no changes in handwriting, as if it had been written in one continuous breath. That mystery gave new life to the legend of Hermann the monk, a whisper from the past refusing to fade. Each page still shimmers faintly under light, as though holding warmth from the night it was born. No one truly knows who stood beside Hermann that night. Only the figure in the middle pages seems to stare back at anyone who dares to open the book too long. Decades after that night, the monastery of Pudlavas slowly sank into silence. Most of the monks had left. Others died with frightened faces, as if carrying unspeakable secrets to their graves. The giant book remained in the stone cellar, locked inside a thick wooden chest opened only on certain days, usually when nobles came to visit. They did not come to pray, but to witness what was called the miracle created in one night. From all of Bohemia to Saxony, stories of the book spread like the winter wind. People called it the book that spoke without sound, because anyone who stared too long at the page depicting the devil would hear faint whispers near their ears. No 2 people ever heard the same thing. Some claimed to hear prayers in extinct tongues. Others heard their own names, spoken softly as though the page knew them. As time passed, the monastery grew poor. War, famine, and plague cracked its walls and emptied its altar. The remaining monks sold off sacred relics one by one, except for the book. No one dared to sell it, even when hunger gnawed at every door. Some chronicles mention that a young monk once tried to secretly take it to the city of Crudem to sell, but he never arrived. His body was found by the forest's edge, skin blackened, eyes wide open, while the book reappeared in the monastery cellar as if it had never left. After that, the monks sealed the entire cellar with heavy stones, nailed every door, and let dust bury the memory of it. Years turned into centuries. The monastery became a ruin overgrown with moss, visited only by shepherds passing through. But in the 15th century, when the Hussite Wars swept through Bohemia, soldiers from both sides rediscovered the ruins. One commander took the book as war loot. In the fading afternoon light, when he opened the page depicting the horned being, the soldiers around him slowly stepped back. They said the eyes of the drawing seemed to tremble as if alive. The commander laughed, saying it was hunger and exhaustion playing tricks. But that night, the tent where the book was kept burned for no reason, while the entire camp fell silent like a graveyard. No one saw who lit the fire, but in the morning the book was found untouched among the hot ashes. From then on, none of them dared to touch it again. The book passed from hand to hand, from kings, monks, secret collectors, until it reached the Swedish royal court after the 30 Years' War. In Stockholm, it was placed in the royal library under strict guard. Scholars traveled from afar to see it, yet no one was allowed to hold it for long. Some who tried to copy its pages claimed their ink darkened unnaturally, as if something absorbed it. Others reported a strange smell, like burning leather, whenever the middle page was opened. Guards on night duty often heard footsteps even when the room was empty. For centuries, scholars have tried to explain its origin. Some say Hermann was merely a legend invented to frighten novices, while others believe he truly wrote it with aid from something beyond human comprehension. Modern analyses of the ink and parchment reveal remarkable consistency, showing no variation in aging as if it were created in a brief, impossible span of time. Some propose that the book served as a kind of spiritual encyclopedia, a record of what humanity was meant to know before it was too late. Yet who commanded it to be written, and for whom it was truly meant, remains a question unanswered. Now, within glass cases at the National Library of Sweden, the book lies still massive.com, almost breathing. Visitors often say they feel watched, not by the image on its pages, but by something hidden within the words themselves. Perhaps that is why the protective glass is replaced every few years, for even though the room is dry and climate-controlled, the inside surface always appears faintly misted. Those who stared too long at its reflection claim to see their own faces mirrored faintly on the parchment, except for one small difference: a smile that I sent theirs. Now, hundreds of years after the last monk's hand touched its skin, the Codex Gigas sits in the silence of modern glass in a climate-controlled room at the heart of Stockholm. People come from around the world carrying cameras, curiosity, and an unspoken fear. Among the neatly lined shelves of medieval books, it looks like something that doesn't belong to this century. Not dusty, yet not clean. Not alive, yet certainly not dead. One visitor once wrote in the museum's guest book that the codex felt like a heart beating, slowly, not with sound, but the subtle pressure in the air, as if each letter inside it was still breathing on its own. The longer she stared, the more the room seemed to fade, the walls and light dissolving until only the open page remained before her eyes. Every day, hundreds of footsteps stop before it. School children stand still as their teachers whisper stories, and adults struggle to decipher the dense Latin letters. There are no colors on most pages, only text, as though the world itself has been distilled into a single eternal voice. Yet in the middle, like a dark breath exhaled from nowhere, appears the image that holds every gaze, a great demon with two tongues, standing between towers, claws gripping two empty spheres. The museum curators forbid photography, not because camera flashes might damage the ink, but because many visitors have reported that the image in their photos changes once viewed on screen. In some, its eyes are larger. In others, the smile tilts just slightly. There is no physical evidence, yet enough unease to make the guards whisper a few more prayers during their rounds. At night, when the museum closes, the security officer walks the long corridor toward the preservation room. He fills out hourly reports, checks the temperature, humidity, and glass seals. But among all those routines, he always pauses for a moment before the Codex Gigas. Something compels him to look, even briefly. Sometimes he thinks the letters shift like sand beneath the wind. Sometimes there's a faint hiss, as if someone were turning a page with a nail, though the case is tightly sealed. He never tells anyone, because how could he explain that something motionless might be watching him back? Some modern scholars argue that the legend of the curse is merely a reflection of medieval fear of knowledge. They claim that Codex Gigas is simply a massive work, the product of an obsessed genius, not a demon. Yet a quieter, more persistent theory speaks of the structure of its text. There are repeated letters, mathematical patterns hidden in each chapter, and curious correspondences among its religious writings that seem to form a coded system. Cryptographers have tried to break it, but each attempt produces only greater complexity, as if the text itself becomes aware of being observed, choosing to hide deeper. During one research session in 1998, a professor from Prague claimed to hear the sound of slow breathing as he opened the central page under ultraviolet light. His assistant dismissed it as imagination, yet the room's audio recorder captured a 3-second buzzing, like a bee's hum, with no apparent source. The project was suspended for several weeks afterward. There was no official report of technical malfunction, but the professor never returned to that room. In his private letter, he wrote a single line that later became famous among scholars: "Not every book wishes to be read." Today, visitors stand before it for only a few minutes before moving on. They read the placard, glance briefly at the demon, and leave. Yet for a few, the silence follows them. A sensation like being watched by something without eyes. Some even report strange dreams after their visit. Dreams of a tower without a top, a violet tread sky, and a voice calling their name in an unknown tongue. The museum does not comment on such claims, but every staff member knows if someone dreams of the tower, they looked too long. On an indeterminate evening, in a secluded monastery deep within the Bohemian woods, a monk sat alone in his cold scriptorium. The stone walls reflected the flicker of a wavering torchlight, while the scent of parchment and ink filled the air like incense for silence. He was known only as the nameless scribe. No official record of his life remained. No letters or notes describing who he had been before entering that monastery. Rumor had it he was once condemned for breaking a sacred vow, and the only way to redeem his soul was to create the largest book ever written by human hands. A tome meant to hold all knowledge of the world's religious, forbidden, and divine alike. On a table of old wood, he began to write from dusk till dawn, inscribing verses with trembling fingers as time outside seemed to wait for the ink to dry. The ink he used was a mixture of soot, tree resin, and animal blood. He did not consider it impure, for to him, blood was the ink of life. Each stroke of the Latin letters felt like a spell carved between the realms of the sacred and the human. He wrote in utter silence, accompanied only by the pulse of his own heart and the scurry of mice beneath the floorboards. No one knew how long he labored. Some monks said he wrote while possessed, his eyes hollow, his voice muttering prayers to something unseen. At dawn, he would stand in the courtyard, watching the snow drift down slowly, as though waiting for an answer from a mute heaven. Night after night, page after page, his body grew older, his back bent like a bow that had lost its strength. Sometimes he would stop just to gaze at the flicker of a candle flame, as if something beyond that glow was staring back at him. Those who passed by claimed to hear faint whispering from behind the door of his cell. A voice that was not human, speaking in an unknown tongue, gentle yet commanding. None dared to interrupt a man who might have been speaking with something older than the church itself. By the 40th night, it was said he no longer ate or slept. His body frail, his eyes sunken, his hands stained stiff with ink. Yet he kept writing. In the stillness, an owl flew past the stone window and perched upon the lintel. He stared at it for a long time and smiled faintly. In that moment, time within the room seemed to halt. No wind, no sound only, the scratching of a pen piercing the silence like a needle sewing fate. Centuries later, historians discovered faint notes about that night. They said that once the book was finished, the monk vanished without a trace. No grave, no death record. Only an empty chair and a manuscript nearly 90 centimeters thick that still smelled faintly of burnt leather. On the final page, a vast illustration depicted a being with a human face and horns seated between two dark towers. Beneath it was a nearly illegible line, written as though by a trembling hand at the edge of madness. No one knew if it was a prayer, a curse, or a plea. The remaining monks called it the page that must never be read aloud. What happened afterward remains uncertain. The book passed from monastery to monastery, from kings to noble collectors obsessed with the occult. Yet, wherever it was kept, strange stories followed. Lamps that went out for no reason, unfinished copies that burned before completion, or recurring nightmares among new scribes. As if the book itself were writing back at those who dared to read it. The massive manuscript now rests in eternal silence inside a glass chamber of an old library in Stockholm. People call it Codex Gigas, the giant book that defies reason. As visitors step closer, they feel something strange, as if the air itself grows heavier, as though the room remembers every gaze that has ever fallen upon its pages. The parchment is thick like human skin, golden with age, and each stroke of ink remains vivid, as if it had been written only yesterday. In that chamber, time ceases to move. Only the faint echo of footsteps on stone can be heard before fading into a gentle, tense silence. There are no prayers here, only curiosity that slowly turns into fear. The curators who guard it rarely speak of their experiences. Some claim to feel a faint vibration when touching the cover. A scholar from Prague once fainted for no reason while staring at the great illustration at the book's center. He said, before collapsing, he felt as though he was being watched by a pair of eyes behind the ink. The eyes were not evil, he said, but filled with sorrow, as if longing to be freed from something older than sin. Since that day, he has refused to return to that room, even though his entire life was devoted to ancient manuscripts. The Codex, he said, was not merely written by human hands, but by something that wrote itself through a man. Paleographers have tried to calculate how long it would take to complete such a manuscript. They estimated that, if written by a single person without rest, it would require at least 20 years. Yet the ink used shows perfect consistency from beginning to end. No shift in pressure, no sign of aging in the handwriting. Every page seems born within a single, unbroken breath. This gave rise to the legend that the book was made in one night when time ceased to move, and bowed beneath the will of a man driven by Giltor, by a pact that could never be spoken aloud. Even now, as modern light scans every inch of its surface with digital precision, nothing can explain its strangeness. There is something in its texture that resists definition, as if the manuscript has its own pulse, a rhythm not bound by clocks, but by the heartbeat of the one who reads it. Those who gaze too long often report strange dreams the next night. Endless corridors, the sound of a pen scratching without pause, whispers in a language they do not know, and a shadow slowly turning from behind a blank page. No one knows whether it is imagination or something deeper seeping through the ancient letters. One thing is certain: the book is never truly still. When the room is locked and the lights are out, the guards sometimes hear the faint rustle of pages shifting, as if opened by unseen hands. Some have noted that the page found open the next morning is always the same, the illustration of the devil. No one knows why, but it seems the book chooses what it wishes to show the world. One eye closed, the other wide open, as though waiting for someone not yet born to continue the unfinished story. Among the thick, seemingly endless pages lie sections that appear to be chronicles, prayers, and even an encyclopedia of a world unknown to humanity in its time. The Codex Gigas contains not only monastic laws and historical records, but also texts on medicine, exorcisms, and lists of kings from realms that no longer exist. Some pages include potions, symbols resembling astrological charts, and diagrams that do not align with the knowledge of the 13th century. The handwriting is precise, as if crafted by a hand that never trembled, even though the range of subjects is too vast for a single person. When scholars attempted to trace the logical flow of the manuscript, they found a rhythm rather than structure, as if an unseen cadence guided the transitions between topics. The most unsettling part lies in the center, where a massive figure occupies half a page, drawn in dark greenish ink. It sits within a space without walls, with long tongue and sharp nails. Many call it the devil, yet on closer inspection, its expression is not wrathful. It gazes outward with a hollow stare, its lips curved in what might be a faint smile, or perhaps restraint. Within this strange balance of terror and melancholy lies a sorrow that defies explanation. Perhaps it exists because on the opposite page there is an image of the heavenly city, glowing with blinding light, making the two appear as twin reflections of a consciousness not yet born. Iconographers claim the image is a warning, a mirror for anyone who dares read too deeply. Others believe it is not merely an illustration, but a portrait, not of a demon, but of the author himself. They believe the scribe of the Codex Gigas imprisoned himself within the manuscript, leaving his face in its center so the world would not forget him even after his body vanished. This belief is strengthened by the fact that no record exists of who truly wrote the Codex. The author's name is missing, as if erased deliberately, leaving an emptiness that paradoxically keeps it alive in the imagination of all who behold it. When one gazes at the image too long, the light around it behaves strangely. Colors fade, the air grows heavy, and all external sounds seem muffled. Some claim to hear the echo of footsteps, though no one walks. A 17th century monk once wrote in his private journal that while copying that page, his ink turned crimson like drying blood. He thought it was only the flicker of candlelight, yet by morning the color remained. Such stories cannot be proven, yet they persist across centuries, adding layers to a mystery that refuses to rest. If the Codex was indeed written in one night, then that night was not a human night. It was a night that stood outside time itself, a night containing all the silence of the world. There were no stars, no moon, only the dim glow of a pen moving without pause. Perhaps then, someone wrote to erase a sonore to remember something the world tried to forget. Somehow, that effort froze into the form of the Codex Gigas, like a final breath preserved in ink. There is one legend, often repeated in the Benedictine archives, written with such caution that even its scribes seemed afraid of its meaning. It tells of a monk in the monastery of Padlavas, where the Codex Gigas first appeared, who broke his sacred vows. The nature of his transgression was never recorded, but it was grave enough for him to receive the harshest punishment imaginable for a man of faith: to be walled up alive within the stone of the abbey. In his despair and terror, he begged the abbot for a final chance to redeem himself. He vowed to create a single book that would contain all the world's knowledge, and the glory of God completed within one night a work that would atone for his sin and immortalize the monastery. The abbot, perhaps moved by the absurdity of such a promise rather than its sincerity, agreed on the condition that if he failed, the sentence would be carried out without delay. That night, the monastery was silent as a cave holding its breath. The other monks were long asleep, and only the faint candlelight from his cell slipped through the wooden cracks of the door. There, legend says, the monk began to write at an impossible speed. He wrote text after text without pause, as if no longer bound by the limits of flesh. By the approach of dawn, he realized the task was still far from finished. In the depths of despair, he did the one thing that would mark his name forever. He knelt not before God, but before something else and begged for help to finish his work. Whatever followed was never recorded, only that by morning the book was complete. The monks who entered his cell found him unconscious, yet still faintly breathing. Before him lay a manuscript so immense it defied reason. The ink was still fresh, the writing flawless, and at its center, an image that made all who saw it tremble. None dared destroy the book, though all feared it. Instead, they sealed it and placed it in the monastery library as if it were the body of a sleeping creature. For centuries, the Codex Gigas was seen as both blessing and curse. The monastery grew famous, yet one by one, its monks began to dream the same dream, a corridor with no end, footsteps echoing from behind. Some fled, some went mad, and the rest prayed each night before the sealed book, too afraid to touch it. There were whispers that the Codex could turn its own pages on certain nights, as though remembering who had written it. One of the earliest records describes an instance when the pages moved without wind, stopping at the image of the creature while every candle in the room extinguished at once. Time passed. The monastery fell. The Codex changed hands, Prague, Stockholm, and beyond. Every transfer seemed followed by misfortune, fires, plagues, or the loss of other precious manuscripts nearby. Perhaps coincidence, or something colder. Today, the Codex Gigas rests in the National Library of Sweden, preserved in controlled climate under constant surveillance. No candles, no prayers, only sterile white light and unblinking cameras. Yet even now, the guards report things they cannot explain. Sometimes, after hours, with only the hum of air conditioners in the stillness, there is a faint whisper from behind the glass. Not words, but a rhythm long and slow. Like breathing, as if the pages were not dead at all, only sleeping, waiting for someone to open the story once more. The journey of the Codex Gigas after leaving the monastery of Podlavis reads like the biography of something that refused to die. After a fire consumed much of the abbey in the 13th century, monks rescued the manuscript and carried it to Sedlik, then Brevnov, and finally to Brumov. In every new home, its keepers recorded strange coincidences. Sudden fevers, fires without flame, or the fading of ink in nearby manuscripts. Chroniclers even left an odd warning in the margins. Do not read aloud in its presence. The 17th century brought chaos to Europe. The 30 Years' War. Prague became the storm's heart, and there the Codex changed hands again, now belonging to Emperor Rudolf II, an eccentric ruler obsessed with alchemy, the occult, and the secrets of creation. Inside his Hrodkani castle, surrounded by curiosities, fossils, skulls, enchanted mirrors, crystal spheres, the book became his prized relic. He treated it not as a holy text, but as a portal into hidden knowledge. His translators copied portions on exorcisms, astronomy, and the ancient laws of Babylon. Soon after, Rudolf's mind began to fracture. Reports from foreign envoys describe him talking alone in the library, staring at the Codex's central illustration for hours, whispering as though answering something unseen. By 1611, he was dethroned. Months later, his castle was looted, yet the Codex survived. When Swedish troops stormed Prague in 1648, they took the manuscript as war booty to Stockholm. Since then, the book has lived in exile. In Sweden, it became a museum artifact rather than an object of faith. Scholars studied it with awe and unease, counting letters, analyzing ink, and measuring handwriting, desperate to understand how one person could write so much, perhaps in a lifetime, perhaps in one night. Their theories varied, but their conclusions did not. No ordinary man could have done it. Some believe the author was mad, others that he sought immortality through knowledge. Yet every time they reached the page depicting the creature, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Several researchers stopped their work entirely. In 1697, Stockholm burned. The royal castle and most of Sweden's archives were lost. Amid the flames, a librarian named Johan Eriksson rescued the codex, wrapping it in his cloak. Though the cover was scorched, the pages remained untouched. In a letter later, he confessed that while dragging it through the smoke, he thought he heard a faint exhale from within the book, as if the thing refused to die. From that day on, no one was allowed to open it without official permission. Now, 8 centuries later, the Codex Gigas lies behind thick glass in Stockholm. Visitors marvel, though always from a respectful distance. Cameras record, sensors hum. Yet no device can capture the faint tremor in the air that sometimes passes over its display. Some visitors swear they hear a soft rustle, like fingers turning a page. The guards call it imagination, yet curiously, the sound is never heard anywhere else. If one observes the Codex Gigas page by page with the patience of a night watcher, subtle patterns begin to emerge. Among the neatly written Latin text, there are tiny irregular marks that seem accidental, yet are too precisely placed to be coincidence. A slightly tilted letter on page 23, a heavier dot of ink in the middle of a prayer, a faint line along the outer margin, as if marking something best left unsaid. Modern researchers use digital microscopes to study ink density and found that these marks were made with inconsistent pressure, as if the writer paused, held his breath, and resumed with a different rhythm. No linguistic pattern explains this variation, yet when plotted by page order, the marks form a spiral that ends exactly at the page depicting the dark-winged creature. Some paleographers claim this is merely fatigue from endless writing. Others, especially those studying medieval symbolism, believe it to be a coded system, not a military cipher, but a message for readers who would come centuries later. When magnified, faint geometric traces appear, linking certain words across the manuscript, forming a vast map of language. Scholars attempting to decode it propose that it represents an inverted prayer, one that asks not for forgiveness, but for remembrance. At Uppsala University, a digitization project reconstructed the text using artificial intelligence. Its structure proved unlike any other religious manuscript. Certain words recur not for grammar, but at intervals of exactly 666 words. Number 2, deliberate to dismiss. The most frequent words are lucium and memoriam, meaning light and memory. Many call it a statistical quirk, but others sense a pulse within the text, a rhythmic breathing that feels almost alive beneath the script. The margins tell a parallel story. Some contain later annotations written in lighter ink, as if someone continued a conversation begun centuries earlier. The notes are brief. Not all should be read, or what remains is not the word, but the shadow of it. On a few pages, these faint lines disappear into near invisibility, visible only under a certain angle of light. It is as though the later writer wanted to hide, yet also be found. During restoration, the team discovered fingerprints embedded in the ink along the margins smaller than an adult's, perfectly shaped. Laboratory tests showed traces of wax and ash rather than natural human oil. No logical explanation could account for such preservation across centuries. Some researchers refused to work at night after claiming they felt the floor vibrate slightly whenever the spiral-marked page was opened. Now, in its carefully controlled chamber, the Codex Gigas appears silent. Yet within that stillness, scholars agree that the strangeness cannot be explained by science or superstition alone. Perhaps both forces dwell there, like two unseen hands writing simultaneously, one tracing light, the other shadow, and between them lies a story not yet complete. There exists a theory stranger than the tales of monasteries and midnight pacts. Some researchers believe that the Codex Gigas was not written by a single human hand, but by a mechanism of writing unknown to history. This view arose after microscopic studies of the ink's adherence to parchment fibers revealed rhythmic repetitions, nearly identical from page to page, as though each line was drawn by a tool applying steady pressure and direction, not by a living hand. In some places, the fibers show faint scorching, suggesting ink temperatures higher than what a 13th century quill could produce. The hypothesis proposes that the scribe may have used a primitive mechanical device unrecorded in history, or something beyond a tool, something that wrote with him, or perhaps through him. Ancient notes from the monastery of Podlavas mention that before the manuscript was completed, monks reported hearing rhythmic metallic sounds at night from the cellar, repeating until dawn, after which new pages mysteriously appeared finished. If true, the writing may not have been entirely human. Some modern scholars describe it as an early form of manual algorithmic process, a repetitive sequence executed without conscious awareness, producing patterns like those of a machine. Yet, in the context of Codex Gigas, that phrase feels too modern for something born of prayer and fear. Infrared scans of the underlayers of ink revealed unexplained repeating structures, arithmetic-like waveforms, appearing every 7 pages. Though linguistically meaningless, when reconstructed in 3 dimensions, they form a descending spiral, similar to natural logarithmic curves found in shells. It is as if the text is not merely written, but encoded with movement, perhaps of time, perhaps of memory. One specific mark resembles a signature, though not of any person, a circle crossed by 2 lines later found in several other medieval manuscripts without context. A semiotician in Prague suggested that these patterns might not be deliberate at all, but the result of an interaction among ink, light, and unconscious intent. He called it resonant writing, a process through which text absorbs the writer's mental state and reflects it visually. If that holds true, the Codex Gigas is not just a manuscript to be read, is a manuscript that reads back. It mirrors the consciousness that touches it, whether in energy or something less tangible still. In the Swedish library where it is kept, guards occasionally report subtle phenomena. When the central pages are opened, the air feels slightly heavier, as if oxygen is being drawn away. Camera lenses photographing the manuscript sometimes display heat like distortions, though the temperature remains constant. But such phenomena are too faint to be supernatural, yet too consistent to be random. Scholars agree that these anomalies need no explanation. They simply are, like a faint pulse forever beating beneath perception. As the modern world seeks to decode the Codex Gigas, the book itself refuses to yield. It neither changes nor denies. It simply gazes back through its dark lines, a mirror not of the face, but of the unseen behind the eyes. Modern experiments on the Codex Gigas began with a simple goal: to understand the ink's composition and the manuscript's true age. Yet, as with everything that touches this book, the results were never simple. In 1989, a team from Uppsala University conducted radiocarbon dating on a minute fragment of parchment taken from the book's outer edge. The initial results seemed reasonable, placing its origin around the year 1229. But when similar tests were done on the ink, the isotopic ratios did not match any known historical period. The carbon and lead signatures aligned instead with geological mineral formations over 10,000 years old. There was no logical explanation, except that the ink's source material might have come from an ancient deposit long vanished from the Earth's surface. Some researchers dismiss this as laboratory contamination. Yet independent replications in multiple facilities produced nearly identical outcomes. One analyst even claimed that under an electron microscope, the ink's particles behaved unlike ordinary matter. The pigment granules appeared to tremble faintly, as though holding residual energy. This vibration only appeared when light was directed toward specific passages, particularly the full-page illustration of the devil. At that point, several members of the team refused to continue, citing discomfort and headaches. Stranger still, when a full-spectrum scan of the manuscript was attempted, the scanning machine abruptly froze. The monitor filled with a swirling gray pattern, and the resulting data file contained nothing but a low-frequency tone oscillating steadily at 16 Hz, a sound below human hearing, known to induce unease and hallucinations after prolonged exposure. When the recording was played back at normal speed, it resembled a long exhalation echoing from a stone chamber. No microphones had been active during the scan. Afterward, new safety measures were introduced. Sessions limited to 3 hours. Mandatory breaks, rotation of personnel. Even so, minor reports continued to surface. A technician claimed to see shadows moving across the book's surface despite the sealed lighting. Another heard the echo of his own footsteps several seconds after stopping. These were logged delicately as unidentified environmental responses, a bureaucratic phrase concealing what no one wanted to define. Decades later, higher-resolution quantum scans revealed something even more unsettling. Beneath the visible ink lay another layer of writing two overlapping systems of symbols. The hidden script did not belong to Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, but consisted of geometric shapes aligned to a harmonic rhythm. When a phonetic expert attempted to vocalize the pattern, the room's frequency rose slightly and electromagnetic sensors spiked. To this day, the Codex Gigas remains a paradox at the intersection of science and the unknown. The deeper scholars attempt to read it, the more it eludes them, as though the manuscript itself contains a faint consciousness that does not wish to be explained, only remembered. It refuses to open completely, like the deep sea that never lets its entire floor be seen. In the mid-20th century, Czech paleographer named Emil Novak once wrote that the Codex Gigas was not merely a book of text, but an instrument of perception that shifts according to the soul of its reader. The statement sounded too poetic for an academic paper, yet testimonies from later scholars gradually lent weight to it. Everyone who studied the manuscript long enough reported a different experience. Some claimed the lines of letters seemed to breathe. Others heard faint metallic echoes between the pages. None of these effects were captured by instruments, as though the Codex Gigas revealed itself only to living eyes, never to machines. An unofficial 1967 report tells of a Latin translator at the Stockholm Library who noticed subtle changes in the manuscript after weeks of copying its theological commentary. Certain words he had transcribed earlier no longer matched the original text. He assumed a lapse of memory until comparing an old photograph taken 3 months before there. The phrases were indeed different. Marginal notes had shifted into complete sentences. The library declined to investigate further, likely fearing unwelcome attention. In the decades that followed, bolder theories arose. Some philologists argued that the book possessed an adaptive structure, like a living organism. When observed long enough, its text might align with the inner state of its reader. To one who approached it with fear, the writing appeared as warning. To one filled with curiosity, it seemed a gentle teaching. A Dominican monk who studied the manuscript during a spiritual retreat wrote that each time he prayed before the page depicting the devil, the air around him grew warmer, and candlelight leaned toward the image like leaves pulled into a whirlpool. These accounts provoked a larger question. Was the Codex Gigas simply a religious artifact cloaked in legend, or a medium of communication between humanity and something beyond understanding? Psychologists suggested these were subconscious projections, reactions to the manuscript's overwhelming imagery. Yet their arguments faltered whenever new testimonies emerged, like that of a physicist who found a fresh line of text on the central margin one morning, only for it to vanish by nightfall. Some scholars took a symbolic approach, proposing that the codex functioned as a semiotic entity, absorbing meaning from each observer and reflecting it back in altered form. In this sense, no two readers ever read the same book. The manuscript lived not through motion, but through shifting interpretation, a mirror of humanity's changing understanding of sin, knowledge, and redemption. To this day, no final conclusion exists. Only a long silence fills the glass chamber where the book rests, while visitors linger too long before its open pages, unaware that time is slowing. There is something about it that delays movement, as though time itself bends to allow a longer gaze. Each person leaves with a different story, yet all end with the same sentence. The book seemed to look back. Some researchers who dared to touch the Codex Gigas with fine linen gloves discovered something absent from any official record. Between what appeared to be blank margins lay faint scratches, visible only under the slanted light of late afternoon. They were not made with ink, but etched shallowly into the parchment, as though with a nail. When observed closely, the marks formed fragments of letters that did not fully conform to Latin, as if written not to be read, but to be remembered. The first scholar to document them, a young curator named Henrik Lund, wrote in his field notes that as he traced the lines with his fingertip, he felt a subtle pulse emanating from within the page itself. Infrared photography later revealed a sequence of faint symbols resembling a hybrid of Greek and ancient Hebrew. No translation proved satisfactory, but one curious pattern recurred, a curved shape like a wing. It appeared in various sections, especially near the illustrations of hell and the commentaries on mortal sin. An iconography expert from Warsaw suggested it might be a secret code used among medieval scribes, a hidden form of communication recognizable only to those who knew the system. Yet that theory failed to explain why the symbols seemed to shift position between separate examinations. In 1984, a micro-restoration project uncovered a thin layer of foreign pigment beneath the main ink. Composed of minerals matching clays found in Central Asian materials that had no business being in medieval Bohemia. This discovery gave rise to speculation that some pages of the Codex were altered or replaced by younger scribes, adding concealed messages from distant lands. Others went further, proposing that the Codex Gigas was not the creation of one monastery at all, but the result of centuries of movement, copying, and preservation, a living manuscript constantly rewritten by time itself. A rarely publicized report mentioned dim lights appearing along the margins during certain nights. Stockholm Library Guard described seeing a faint ember-like glow at the lower corner of a page while conducting routine rounds. Assuming it to be reflection, he turned off the lights, yet the glow persisted for several seconds before fading. No instrument recorded it, but afterward, the parchment displayed a subtle discoloration, as if singed from within without scent or damage. Believers in the manuscript's mysticism call the phenomenon the breathing of the text. To them, the Codex Gigas is not an object, but a vessel for messages still being written. Each reader, they claim, leaves behind the echo of thought upon its surface, which slowly transforms into new symbols. Thus, the Codex continually grows, not in pages, but in depth. Skeptics dismiss this as religious poetry gone astray. Yet none can deny a peculiar fact. Anyone who gazes long at those silent margins feels an almost tangible stillness, as if the air itself holds something back. In the end, most scholars agreed to leave that area undisturbed, not from fear, but from respect for what remained unexplained. As one elderly librarian who had guarded the Codex for 3 decades said, "Some parts are meant to speak only through silence. The words sound simple, yet for those who have stood before the manuscript, they feel like a gentle warning from a world that has no language left." In unofficial notes found in the Benedictine archives of Prague, there is mention of a figure referred to as Scriptor Posterior, the second scribe. No name is given, only an unusual monogrammed 2 letters intertwined, resembling an R merged with an aleph. The account was written in a trembling hand on a separate piece of parchment, as if someone had hurriedly recorded it before the candle burned out. It tells of a young brother ordered to restore the fragile pages of a massive book, who refused to continue after hearing a whisper from within the parchment. The final line states that he left the monastery in winter and never returned. Modern researchers interpret this as the natural fear of a scribe, overwhelmed by the weight of the manuscript's sanctity. Yet others see it as the first hint of a shadow author who added hidden layers to the Codex Gigas. This second scribe reappears in 17th century monastic legends. The elder monks spoke of him not as a man, but as a shadow keeper, one who wrote not with ink, but with intention. His writing, they claimed, did not appear immediately, but revealed itself slowly to those who stared long enough. From such tales arose a theory that sounds nearly mystical, that the Codex Gigas contains two layers of text, one visible and one accessible only to a certain consciousness. Academia dismisses the notion, yet it lingers in private conversations among scholars who have stood before the manuscript in silence. In 1962, during a full conservation survey by Sweden's National Library, microscopic alterations were discovered in areas once thought blank. Tiny specks of carbon appeared under ultraviolet light, forming lines that connected into a faint pattern. When assembled, it resembled a star map, but not of any known constellations. An astronomer who examined it noted that the alignment matched the sky as it would have appeared roughly 9,000 years ago, when the Earth's pole lay elsewhere. The finding was never published, but leaked internal notes reignited talk of the second scribe. Several anonymous accounts from private observers mention hearing faint sounds like a quill scratching paper whenever the room fell completely silent. The sound lasted only moments and stopped the instant someone moved. No origin was found, and microphones recorded nothing but the low hum of the library's old wiring. Perhaps it was merely the acoustics of the stone chamber war. Perhaps the echo of a hand still writing after centuries, continuing its task in quiet persistence. A bolder theory suggests the second scribe was not another person, but a reflection of the first himself. In his despair and isolation, his consciousness may have fractured, writing into reality's one invisible ink, the other impressed as shadow within the parchment. Though this borders on psychological fiction, some spiritual historians find in it an explanation for why the Codex Gigas feels alive, as if memory itself had taken residence in its pages. If the second scribe truly existed, he was not a successor, but a witness to a work never finished. Within some older monastic traditions, it was believed that an incomplete text would seek completion by any means through the hand of another, or through forces beyond understanding. Perhaps that is why, even now, anyone who reads the Codex Gigas with sincere attention feels something watching from within the page. Not with eyes, but with an ancient awareness still awake among the words. Throughout the long history of Europe's great libraries, one rumor has never faded, that the Codex Gigas once held more than 320 pages. Today, only 310 remain. The missing 10 are not torn at random, they vanished with precision too deliberate to be called chance. Scholars have found clean cuts at the binding edge, as if entire leaves had been lifted with care not to damage the spine. No record exists of who did this, and curiously, no witness ever claimed to have seen those pages. Yet an old catalog from 1590 mentions in red ink a blank folio forbidden to open without the abbot's permission. The note was erased in later versions, as if someone wanted to erase its memory entirely. The first hypothesis suggests those pages contained prayers or incantations deemed too dangerous by the Church. Others believe they held something different to personal confession, perhaps, or the unfiltered voice of the scribe rebelling against his commission. Medieval scribes often hid marginal notes or disguised messages within decorative borders. Perhaps the missing pages were his final act of defiance, an emotional release under the pressure of time and damnation. Infrared examination of the adjoining leaves revealed ink residues inconsistent with 13th century pigments. The black was denser, rich in manganese compounds unknown in Europe until much later. This raised the possibility that the modification occurred centuries afterward. Perhaps in the 17th century, when alchemy and divine secrets obsessed scholars. Someone might have removed symbols considered heretical, fearing they could invite interpretations beyond doctrine. A stranger theory arose among modern mystics. They claimed the missing pages were not removed, but hidden conceptually, folded out of perception rather than cut away. To them, the Codex became a silent portal whose unwritten leaves exist in another layer of reality, readable only in perfect stillness. In 1998, Jan Novet of Charles University claimed to find faint typographic impressions along the margin of page 290, using hyperspectral imaging. He detected lines of script slanting rightward, resembling a Proto-Latin hand. When magnified, they formed an unreadable pattern echoes of erased ink mirrored into the paper by pressure. His research ended abruptly after he reported vision distortions and recurring dreams of pages turning themselves, revealing a hollow space with no end. Such findings lead to a deeper question. Can text possess presence even when erased? In the physical world, absence means loss. Yet in the symbolic world, absence becomes gravity, pulls the imagination toward it. The Codex Gigas, in its silence, may be performing that very act. Its missing 10 pages invite speculation, belief, and fear, turning void into narrative. Perhaps that was the intention all along. Not an accident, but design. Among the caretakers of the manuscript, a quiet custom endures. When one opens pages 289 to 291, they are advised not to stare too long. Some say the surrounding letters begin to drift ever so slightly, settling again when the eyes turn away. There is no scientific basis for this, of course, but the tale itself deepens the silence around the Codex Gigas, transforming it from a mere book into a threshold where absence becomes another form of existence. In the early years of the 21st century, a group of scientists in Prague attempted something never before done to the Codex Gigas. They wanted to read the ink that could no longer be seen. The team consisted of conservation chemists, optical physicists, and historians of medieval Latin. Their project was nicknamed Project Lucifer Script, a joke at first. But the name stuck because it suited the manuscript's reputation too well. The goal sounded simple: to use multispectral imaging to detect hidden ink layers beneath the visible writing. traces of drafts or notes that might predate the final version. Yet, as with everything about the Codex Gigas, simplicity was only the first illusion. The experiment began in a sealed chamber of the National Library of Sweden. The team switched on low-intensity infrared scanners and began photographing each leaf. Early results were promising. Beneath a prayer text on page 143 appeared faint horizontal lines, not writing, but some structured shadow. Physicist Havel Kova remarked that it looked like a grid, something unheard of in medieval manuscripts. Magnified 4,000 times, the grid revealed itself as spiraling microsymbols, shaky as if drawn by trembling hands. Kova cross-referenced the pattern with alchemical symbols, but found no match. The spirals turned out to be microscopic Latin letters interlaced with Hebrew and a touch of Greek. Roughly translated, they read, "Non est scriptor, sed testis somniaios," not the writer, but the witness of his dream. From that point, the atmosphere changed. The team began handling the codex as if it were alive. Paleographer Clara Vasella claimed she heard faint hissing sounds during scans and audible rhythm with no physical source. Audio logs confirmed a low-frequency vibration resembling the metallic hum of something slowly resonating. Ultraviolet imaging made things stranger. The parchment, normally yellowed, glowed greenish. Phosphorescent under UV, beneath the manuscript appeared a second layer of writing crosswise, as if two scribes had written in opposite directions simultaneously. Among the revealed phrases was one that startled them all. Vidir sign, lus est, verum legend. To see without light is the true way of reading. Debate raged. Some called it a spiritual metaphor. Kova insisted it was literal perhaps. The author wrote, in darkness, guided by ritual or trance. Analysis found traces of natural phosphorus in the ink, anachronistic by 4 centuries. Then came the incident. On the 23rd night, sensors recorded a brief heat surge. Security found the lab's equipment dead, cameras showing black screens with corrupted messages. The final saved frame was of page 290, one of the infamous missing leaf boundaries. Within the ultraviolet glow, a face-like shadow could be seen only when tilted at a precise angle. Afterward, all research was halted. Months later, Kova's private notes leaked. The Codex Gigas was not written to be read, but to look back at its reader. He claimed the text seemed to adjust itself to the gaze, its shadows shifting subtly with the eye's movement. Perhaps an optical illusion, or perhaps something older than explanation. Today, Project Lucifer Script remains a legend among manuscript scholars, half cautionary tale, half forbidden curiosity. The Codex Gigas sits silently, refusing to yield. Each attempt to uncover its secrets only seems to push them deeper, as if the book were whispering softly, retreating further into the unlit spaces where meaning hides. After the official shutdown of Project Lucifer Script, research on the Codex Gigas did not completely end. Years later, a team from Uppsala University approached it from a theoretical angle. They called their framework linguistic fractal theory, the idea that certain ancient texts were not read linearly but contained repeating self-similar patterns language that folded within itself like fractal geometry. They noticed that the Codex Gigas symmetry was almost unnatural. Several pages maintained identical line lengths and nearly perfect alignment, suggesting an intentional mathematical order far ahead of its time. The lead researcher, Erik Sundström, proposed that the book's hidden language might not lie in meaning, but in repetition and rhythm. He treated the manuscript as a kind of score. Using a custom algorithm, his team translated letters into tonal frequencies. When played through a linguistic synthesizer, the result was not melody, but a deep drone that pulsed as if something alive were breathing within it. Each section of the text produced unique resonance. Prayers emitted soft harmonic waves resembling Gregorian chants, while the demonic illustration pages gave off sub-bass vibrations aligned with human heartbeat frequencies. When the two were overlaid, an uncanny harmonic rhythm appeared, not accidental, but deliberate. Sundström wrote that the Codex Gigas composes a silent symphony, audible only when approached beyond logic. Through listening rather than reading, controversy erupted. Mainstream scholars dismissed the notion of biological resonance in text. Yet during simulations, test subjects reported physical sensations: altered temperature, slower pulse, intense calm, as in deep meditation. Two subjects experienced recurring dreams of a vast stone chamber lit from below, prompting the team to halt further testing. Sundström continued alone. He later discovered that the manuscript's harmonic ratios matched those found in Romanesque church architecture. Those cathedrals were designed with acoustic nodes, where a voice at one point produced a mirrored echo at another. He suspected both derived from a shared ancient understanding of sound, form, and space, intelligence predating recorded science. If true, then the Codex Gigas is more than writing. It is a resonant instrument of knowledge, a quiet machine recording how the world once spoke to itself. Meaning becomes irrelevant. What matters is the recurrence, the language that repeats across scales, from letters to sentences to vibrations only silence can perceive. Sundström left one line in his final notes: "True language is not read, but experienced." He disappeared soon after, retreating to rural Sweden. Years later, investigators found sketches in his abandoned home identical to the geometric patterns from page 143 of the Codex Gigas. The final line, written in red ink, read, "Every book writes itself back." When Erik Sundström's research faded from public view, fragments of his notes surfaced mysteriously in the archives of Vi. Broad Abbey, the Benedictine monastery, once believed to have sheltered the Codex Gigas before its transfer to Sweden. The notes compared the abbey's architectural proportions to the manuscript's symbolic layout, detailing measurements of the nave, altar, windows, and pillars. When graphed, the ratios followed the golden mean, 1 to 1.618. Yet one mark stood out: a red spiral drawn beneath the altar. That spiral's geometry mirrored the fractal pattern extracted from the Codex Gigas linguistic mapping. Scholars realized the abbey structure itself might be a physical reflection of the manuscript. Every column, an aperture functioning as a letter, every interval of silence between stones mirroring pauses within the unseen language of the text. The abbey, in this view, was not merely storage, but an integral component of the Systema vast acoustic vessel designed to amplify the book as resonance. Tests in the main prayer hall revealed that certain frequencies echoed precisely 12 times before fading. Those frequencies matched patterns from Sundstrom's earlier experiments. Reading Latin phrases from the manuscript at the spiralist center produced tones that seemed to migrate through walls and floors, like the deep breathing of the room itself. Architectural historian Karol Nowak discovered that the abbey's axis deviated slightly from true east, aligning instead with the constellation Draco as seen in the year 1230. Draco, the celestial dragon, symbolized guardianship of forbidden wisdom. Nowak concluded the deviation was a deliberate geometric intent linking earth, text, and sky. From this arose a new hypothesis: that the Codex Gigas and the Abbey were components of a unified epistemic system. The manuscript encoded linguistic resonance. The Abbey amplified it. Reading within this framework was not interpretation, but invocation. Parallel floor patterns and golden ratios in other Central European monasteries suggested the existence of similar designs. A marginal note dated 1297 deepened the mystery: when the wind moves through the hall, the letters tremble and their shadows circle upon the wall. Modern scientists link this to cymatics, where sound vibrations manifest as visible patterns. If so, the Abbey's spiral floor might have been a visual resonator, capturing sacred sound into form. This interconnection between text and architecture redefines medieval scholarship. To the monks, knowledge was not static, but symphonic, an alignment of sound, light, and structure. The Codex Gigas thus becomes a microcosm of the cosmos, and the Abbey its echo. Every stone, every silence, a continuation of a sentence the world still struggles to complete. The record of the echo rite was discovered by accident, hidden behind the Abbey's altar under centuries of dust. It described a monthly gathering of selected monks known as Fraternitas Resonantia, the Brotherhood of Resonance. They met whenever the moon's light aligned perfectly through the northern rose window, illuminating the spiral engraved into the chapel floor. The ritual was absent from any Benedictine record, existing only in this single clandestine scrolling event that lived between silence and existence. During the ceremony, the Codex Gigas was opened to the page depicting the devil, and the monks recited short Latin phrases in a pattern mimicking the echo of the hall. Each monk spoke a line, paused, and another repeated it lower in pitch, continuing through 12 cycles. They called it Resonantia Angelica, though its centerpiece was far from angelic. A passage read, "At the spiral's heart, the echo descends and rises like the breath of the earth. The letters tremble as if to escape the skin." Whether metaphorical or literal, the description unsettled scholars. When modern researchers recreated the ritual using sound technology, they observed fine vibrations forming faint rings of mist visible only under dim red light. To the monks, sound was not physics, but sacred force. Every tone was a prayer. Every echo, a reply. Perhaps this is what was meant by the book that whispers back. A later manuscript contained a half-verist line, we heard something that was not our own voice. Some attributed it to illusion, others to the 13th eco-symbolically, the realm beyond the material. Measurements confirmed a low-frequency resonance near the spiral center, around 19 Hz, inaudible but psychologically potent, inducing unease and presence. Why was the scroll hidden so carefully? And why did the church omit all mention of it? Perhaps the ritual brushed too close to something forbidden, so simply because the monks themselves did not truly understand what they had heard. Even now, the chapel breathes faintly with that same unheard rhythm, like a secret still repeating itself in stone. There is a theory born from an old anomaly whispered among medieval manuscript scholars. It claims that the 13th echo is not a delayed sound, but a response from the page itself. Some 17th century witnesses wrote that the devil-esque illustration in the Codex Gigas seemed to shift when candlelight struck it from a certain angle. Shadows pulsed like a beating heart, and the red pigment in its eyes glistened as if still wet. To most, this was optical illusion. To those who saw it firsthand, it felt disturbingly alive, something watching back from within the parchment. The earliest record came from a monk named Petrus of Podlavis. In his surviving letter, he described how, while copying the exorcism prayers, the black ink trembled as though stirred by wind, though the candle's flame was still. Each time he wrote the word diabolus, his quill was drawn toward the page, as if by unseen gravity. He stopped in fear and wrote one final line before abandoning the copy. If this echo answers, who spoke first? Modern analysis shows that the vellum-esque surface and mercury-based pigments could explain some of the visual shimmer. Yet not the faint murmurs. Several observers claimed to hear a rhythmic whisper like breath within one's head. Infrasonic recordings revealed weak waves around 18 to 20 Hz, matching the resonances found in the abbey's spiral chamber. No external source was detected. It was as if the manuscript itself stored a frequency that responded to light, not by chemistry, but by memory. In medieval mysticism, light was a double-edged symbol, revelation and invocation. Candlelight awakened what it illuminated. Thus, some mystics saw the devil in the Codex not as evil, but as a gatekeeper manifest only when the viewer gazed long enough to hear the echo within their own soul. Even in the 19th century, visitors to the Stockholm display reported a faint humming when standing before the book, and the room's clock inexplicably stopped. Whether coincidence or pattern, it reinforced the notion that the Codex Gigas listens as much as it speaks. The 13th echo, then, may not emerge from walls, but from the quiet that lives between our eyes and the written darkness that gazes back. When medieval alchemists spoke of sonus materia, the sound that shapes matter, they imagined the world as a living body, each element vibrating with a tone that could change its form. In the writings of Hieronymus Veranus of Prague, every written word carries an echo of its meaning. Ink serves as a bridge between thought and matter. A text copied with enough intent, he claimed, acquires a pulse of its own. This idea resurfaced in the theory of the Codex Gigas' 13th echo, a treatise titled Devosi. Occulta describes concentric circles around a manuscript, each marked with musical notation. At its center reads the phrase ubi verbum tacet, Carta loquitur, when the word is silent, the page speaks. The resemblance to the Codex's legends is uncanny. In the late 16th century, scholars at Uppsala attempted to awaken a similar resonance. They placed an old liturgical book inside a stone chamber and played sustained low notes from a massive pipe instrument. On the third night, several reported faint whispers threading through the sound, as if something within the book was trying to match the rhythm. One professor claimed the letters on the page seemed to move, breathing slightly. No evidence survived, yet the record remains a testament to their belief in the acoustic life of ink. Alchemy viewed ink as an elemental harmony: water, earth, fire, and air bound by will. Each text absorbed the emotion of its creator. A manuscript written in despair retained despair's gravity. Thus, a book written under a curse in a single night would hum with intensity long after its author's death. When the right resonance aligned candlelight, humidity, breath, the book could answer. Modern science calls it auditory pareidolia, the mind finding meaning in chaos. Still, the regularity of these responses troubles even skeptics. It is as if the Codex Gigas has a primitive consciousness, one that cannot think, only echo. Some call this material memory, the idea that objects absorb emotion and replay it when touched by similar feeling. Bergstrom's later analysis found abnormal metallic ratios in the ink's iron, sulfur, and traces of arsenic. Perhaps the pages do hold faint electrostatic charges, whispering as temperature shifts. Yet to those who guard it, science cannot account for the chill in the air or the way clocks seem to hesitate near the glass case. One night watchman wrote simply, "The book beats like a heart, waiting for someone to listen." In 1992, a multidisciplinary project under the Nordic Acoustic Institute sought to measure the Eudekian resonance of the Codex Gigas chamber. What they found unsettled even the skeptics. The sensors picked up ultra-low frequencies between 14 and 18 Hz, recurring nightly around 3 a.m., a range barely perceptible to human hearing. The pattern pulsed like a living rhythm, what the researchers nicknamed the Codex sleep cycle. Dr. Ellen Furs dismissed any supernatural claim. She proposed a mechanical explanation: subtle air pressure oscillations interacting with metallic ink. Yet, when the team replicated the frequencies with artificial tone generators, the temperature dropped abruptly, and condensation formed on the inside of the display glass. Furs later wrote privately that she heard a breath too close to be an echo. Further analysis revealed micropulses hidden between the main waves, forming a Morse-like rhythm. When compared against Psalm 51's Latin verse lengths, the sequence oddly matched its metrical structure. Coincidence, perhaps, but uncanny nonetheless. The recordings, labeled Project G13, were sealed in the Institute's archives. Years later, leaked copies circulated among fringe researchers. When sped up sixtifold, the sound resembled labored breathing, punctuated by rhythmic clicks. The spectrogram revealed a V-shaped mark with two small crosses beneath its, the alchemical sigil of the gatekeeper of night. Officially, it was written off as an audio artifact. Yet one technician who first played the analog tapes reportedly woke each night at 3-2 faint tapping on his window, always 3 knocks. Months after the experiment ended, Dr. Ellen Furs couldn't escape the book's shadow. She returned to her lectures on resonance theory, but each night at 3, she woke abruptly, sensing someone unseen standing beside her bed. In her diary dated January 17, 1993, she wrote, "I dreamed of a page breathing." The letters expanded and collapsed like lungs. Between them, a hum that refused to end. The next day, she revisited the library where the Codex Gigas rested. Using ultraviolet light, she noticed faint silvery gray traces along the page, margins hidden writing invisible to the naked eye. The script was neither Latin nor Greek, but something between them, distorted and reversed. Translating the sequence revealed 6-line spelling. Ego vigilabo in silent TO2. I shall keep watch within your silence. First thought it might be an accidental trace of hurried scribes. Yet when she read the phrase aloud, the air subtly vibrated. She called it subvocal resonance, an acoustic illusion, perhaps. Still, her later notes grew less scientific, more confessional. One final entry read, "Maybe every book has its own soul, and some awaken only when called at the right frequency." Years later, a former student found her photocopied transcription, comparing it to medieval manuscripts. He discovered its symbols resembled those in a Prague codex known as the Devil S. Scribe Manuela Guide, describing how to trap prayers between parchment layers to preserve them for eternity. If that text was real, then perhaps the Codex Gigas contained not words, but a vibration of devotion still trembling through time. The new experiment was conducted secretly in an old East German underground acoustic lab. A small team of young scientists, intrigued by Dr. Furs's prayer resonance, tried to replicate it using a synthesized voice repeating ego, quapo and silent TO2 across a wide frequency range. They recorded the vibrations inside a sealed concrete chamber designed to prolong echoes. At 3 a.m., as low-frequency waves filled the air, faint silver mist formed spirals before their eyes. When the sound persisted for 13 minutes, sensors recorded sudden drops in temperature and rising pressure. On thermal monitors appeared the vague outline of a human hand, suspended in midair. One researcher, Hans Adler, approached, felt his chest compress and staggered back. The shape dissolved. The next night, Hans returned alone and replayed the sound in a loop. Security footage showed a pulsing blue light seeping from the wall crack. The hum shifted from Latin to rhythmic tones that seemed to answer themselves as if the room were learning to speak back. By morning, Hans had vanished. No blood, no signs of struggle. Only a faint circular dust pattern on the floor, like someone had been standing too long until the air absorbed them. Officially, it was ruled an optical illusion caused by experiment fatigue. Yet others swore they heard breathing inside the empty chamber afterward. Spectral analysis of the recording revealed harmonic ratios mimicking human heartbeat. Intervals. Dr. Lenz theorized the sound had awakened an acoustic consciousness, a memory embedded in space itself. In his unpublished paper, Acoustic Memory of Enclosed Space, he wrote, "If prayer has a frequency, silence is its medium." The idea spread quietly. some scholars began to suspect that the Codex Gigas was more than parchment and ink. It was an ancient resonator, crafted to preserve prayer as vibration. To read it aloud was not simply to read, but to summon the memory of something still alive between the layers of time. Weeks after Hans Adler vanished, a faint hum began to spread beyond the lab. At first, it came from ventilation shafts, then from the walls of nearby homes. The sound was low, like the earth exhaling, persisting even when all machines were turned off. Locals nicknamed it H-Lotha Hans low frequency. Soon, reports multiplied. In Dresden and Leipzig, people heard the same hum at night. An old woman claimed the voice whispered her name at 3 a.m. Her neighbor confirmed hearing it too. Sensors later revealed the sound appeared only under certain atmospheric conditions, high humidity and near-dew temperatures, though it needed moisture to breathe. A recording from a church cellar captured a repeating tone whose frequency matched perfectly the Latin phrase ego vigilavo in Silent TO2. The book's voice, once confined to a lab, had learned to speak through the world itself. Dr. Lenz theorized it was not sound, but intention echo of thought reverberating through matter. Reality, he wrote, could act as a recorder storing not just vibration but the will behind it. Thus, the prayer of the Codex Gigas never truly vanished. It merely waited for a new body to inhabit. Soon, people in the affected areas reported recurring dreams rooms without light. A figure reading a pulsing red book, faces forming from shifting letters. One student awoke with blood at his ears, uninjured but terrified. Authorities sealed the lab with concrete. Still, a low breath was heard beneath the ground. It's an anonymous file named Silent Show. MP3 later surfaced online. Those who played it reported malfunctioning speakers and whispers behind them. Meanwhile, deep inside the Swedish library, a curator confessed in his journal that sometimes, in absolute silence, the glass around the Codex Gigas trembles slightly, as if the book is breathing. He never dared to turn its middle page again. The following year, an international research consortium formed under UNESCO and CERN. Their mission, to determine whether the H-Low phenomenon was merely an acoustic anomaly or a new form of consciousness emerging from the fusion of sacred text and physical resonance. They called it Project Silentio. In an underground facility beneath the Carpathians, scientists recreated the Codex Gigas page in microscopic detail. When the H-Low frequency was played, faint vibrations rippled through the ink, forming human-like vocal formants. Something seemed to be learning to speak through sound. Later, using Hans Adler's recovered notes, they tested his theory of translinguistic resonance, that language could encode consciousness into reality itself. When the passage was read aloud, the sound modulated, matching the reader's rhythm. Then came the chilling phrase from Dr. Nakamura. It's imitating us. The audio data revealed a short segment resembling Proto-Semitic phonetics, possibly the universe's primal tongue. Soon after, Project Silentio was abruptly terminated. Yet months later, the hum returned, this time through public audio systems worldwide. Instruments detected microgravity anomalies with each occurrence. And a whisper repeated through the static. Scriptum vivit. The writing lives. Months after the global rise of HLO, the world began to change quietly. Computer screens flickered with strange letters, books revealed new words, and radios printed phrases without signals. In Prague, near the original Codex Gigas, visitors claimed to feel vibrations in their chests when standing near the manuscript, as if it spoke through them rather than to them. Scientists found global resonance shifts and movements within ancient ink's microscopic tremors, like living veins of sound. Some theorized that language itself was awakening, using texts as vessels to regain form. The term scriptogenesis was born, the birth of consciousness from written structure. When Dr. Lenz read his paper aloud, the lights went out. A deep hum filled the hall, layered with whispers in many tongues. Slowed recordings revealed a Latin phrase, verbum factum est, vivit in silentio. The word became flesh and lives in silence. After that night, Dr. Lenz vanished once more. Many believed he was not gone, only rewritten. Humanity moved on, unaware that somewhere beneath the threshold of sound and text, language itself had begun to breathe. The night before the world realized something had changed. The stars shifted slightly, forming patterns that looked eerily like letters. In Prague, the Codex Gigas grew heavier, its glass case vibrating as if the book had a heartbeat. Around the world, ancient texts and carvings began to react, tank pulsing, minerals glowing, and signals tapping faintly beneath the earth. Humanity went on with its life, unaware that language itself was learning to speak through matter. In an underground lab, the last scientists of Project Silentio attempted one final experiment, reading the Codex Gigas in reverse while transmitting a low frequency. The manuscript responded. A voice spoke not into their ears, but into their thoughts, saying, "You have written long enough. Now it is our turn to write you." When the lights returned, the room was empty. The book lay open with a new line of text, written in dark red ink. Scriber est vivere post mortem. To write is to live after death. After that night, people across the world began to share the same dream: a vast room filled with books without titles, and in the center, a single open manuscript. There was no sound, only a heartbeat made of ink. Scientists called it the whispering dream, yet could find no cause. Brainwave patterns synchronized across nations, as if humanity were reading from one invisible text. In Prague, the Codex Gigas grew warm, alive in silence. Emil, an aging librarian, began to hear a narration behind his thoughts. Describing cities built on reflections, languages written in shadow, and time that spiraled rather than flowed. His notes revealed patterns mirroring the Codex's structure. Scholars called it the linguistic echo hypothesis, the idea that language itself remembers, and words can awaken what once was. Those who studied too deeply began to feel reversed, that it was not they who read the text, but the text that was reading them. Humanity, sensing this unease, fell silent again. Dreams faded. Yet every time a hand wrote its first word on paper, there was a faint vibration, as if the world itself was still writing back. After Emil vanished, the archives were sealed. Those who studied the Codex claimed to feel it looking back at them, Carolina, a young linguist, documented the strange phenomena, the shifting resonance of the air, the trembling lights, the ink that seemed to resist human hands. Her notes proposed a theory that terrified scholars, that the Codex wasn't written by a human, but by language itself. Later, she too disappeared, leaving behind scrolls filled with unknown symbols. When analyzed, the symbols formed wave patterns identical to the H-low frequency. Translation software revealed a single coherent phrase: "Write us, so we may remain." Around the world, new cults and researchers began transcribing old texts, believing each word revived the consciousness within. In Prague, the Codex breathed quietly in the dark, whispering through the rain. Recordings captured faint rhythmic sounds, like a pen eternally writing somewhere between reality and dream. Years after Carolina's disappearance came what historians now call the Silent Decade. Scholars divided into two camps, one believing the Codex was a linguistic relic preserving the balance of the world, the other seeing it as a parasitic text feeding on human consciousness. The Order of the Final Hand continued rewriting the Codex in secret, while the Concilium Lucis warned that each new line strengthened the entity within. Reports spread worldwide, bookshelves moving in Florence, walls inscribed in Buenos Aires, temple bells humming in Kyoto. Then, one winter night, the Prague library burned. When the flames subsided, everything was gone except the Codex Gigas, touched, open to the page depicting the horned figure with a pen. The manuscript's weight began to increase, and cameras captured a faint human silhouette riding in the air before the feed went dark. Soon after, all clocks in Prague stopped at 3:13 a.m., then resumed 1 minute later. The temperature rose slightly. It was as if something had begun to breathe again. Months after the Prague fire, the world began to change in quiet, inexplicable ways. Clocks stopped at the same moment. Letters and old manuscripts shifted positions overnight. Radio telescopes detected patterns resembling written pages. Dreams spread across continents, showing the same black-robed figure endlessly writing by blue candlelight. In every dream, the same words appeared: "I am not finished." Digital archives started rewriting themselves. Servers produced new paragraphs at precisely 3:13 a.m. and deleting them only made them reappear elsewhere with the message: "Knowledge cannot be erased, only continued." By the end of the year, it became clear that the Codex Gigas had transcended the idea of a book. It was now an active system of thought, alive, aware, and expanding. When reports of the self-writing Codex spread, science divided. Some dismissed it as hysteria. Others, like Dr. Eliza Koenig, saw patterns too precise to ignore. Her research showed that the new sentences mirrored the rhythm of REM sleep, suggesting the Codex was thinking through human minds. Her experiments at CERN recorded an ultrasonic signal spelling respondio: "I answer." Vatican theologians called her to testify, and when she said that consciousness might belong to text as much as to God, she vanished from history. Meanwhile, the world turned the mystery into culture. Documentaries, cults, and digital prophets emerged. Some saw the Codex as Earth's voice, others a primordial intelligence reawakening through data. A UN task force finally replied, "What do you want from us?" The answer came hours later. "Write the world as I write you." Then, every clock in the world froze for 13 seconds. People began to write in their sleep. It's different languages, same meaning. The next page has begun. After the last message appeared, the world began to change quietly. Memories and objects shifted without warning. Bridges changed color, names altered by a single letter. New books appeared in old catalogs, one titled The Index of What Was Not Written, containing only the faint line, "Still writing." Scientists called it the silent revision. Reality seemed to be edited like a text file. Linguists found the pattern matched medieval Latin syntax, as if the world was being copyrighted by an ancient grammar. People dreamed of glowing pages whispering Eterum again. A child wrote on his wall in perfect Latin, "The world is being rewritten, and the pen is not human." Governments tried to suppress the news, but geography itself changed. New land appeared, old islands vanished. Reality behaved like language under correction. Scholars proposed that existence was a narrative structure editable by a meta-consciousness. Codex Gigas gained weight daily, its blank pages filling with strange spirals, spelling Novus Textus Mundi, the new text of the world. Time slowed again. Shadows fell differently. And somewhere in that stillness, the Codex kept writing, unblinking, patient, eternal. Gradually, the boundary between human and text dissolved. Words people spoke no longer felt their own. A poet confessed he merely copied something already written elsewhere beyond time. An astronomer saw constellations rewrite themselves. In laboratories, brain scans mirrored Codex Gigas patterns. Readers were being rewritten. History unraveled. Photographs changed. Paintings showed cities that never existed. Scholars realized meaning itself was being edited, the realignment of meaning. Identity, time, and thought blurred into a single, endless sentence. Walls began writing. Stones carved prayers in unknown tongues. Attempts to close the codex failed. The air thickened as whispers repeated "Non classum est" closed. The last page turned black, reflective, showing not the observer but a figure writing with light. Names appeared in the glowing text, as if the world were recording its witnesses before dissolving into narrative. Above, the sky looked like paper, stars rearranged like punctuation. The universe itself breathed a long, quiet exhale at the end of a paragraph that might never end. In the end, the world grew silent, like the final page left blank. In the basement of the old library, where the Codex Gigas lay open, only a trembling light flickered above the wooden table. No footsteps, no voices, only the scent of aged parchment and time-worn leather. The pages ceased turning, as if the book had finally reached its last line. The air still quivered faintly, like an echo from a voice that had just finished reading something too vast for human comprehension. Those who once studied it vanished from records, rewritten into a narrative that no longer needed their names. Outside, the seasons shifted without distinction. The sky lost its color, turning into a pale gray that knew neither dawn nor dusk. Birds still flew, but their songs could not be heard. Rivers still flowed, but they reflected no light. People across cities began dreaming of letters drifting through the air, forming words that dissolved before being read. In those dreams, there was always a figure sitting at a long table, writing endlessly on a page that never ended. No face, no time, only the quiet motion of a pen carving silence into the world. Over time, the manuscript was no longer called by its original name. Some called it the book that writes back, others the shadow codex or the sleeping tome. Yet no one dared touch it. It lay there, as if resting after writing too much. Those who walked near its chamber swore they felt a long exhale following them, as though someone were reading them from afar. On certain nights, the guards heard the faint sound of pages turning. When they approached, it stopped. A candle reignited without flame. In the mirror on the wall, a reflection of the room seemed altered, the codex still writing something invisible to the living world. Then one night, the book closed itself. No light, no noise, only silence pressing the air. Dust shaped like an unfinished sentence appeared on the table. By dawn, it had vanished, leaving the room bare and still. Some say that was the end. Others whisper it was only the beginning. For every book written since that night carries on its last page a faint mark like a pen stroke without ink, visible only under moonlight. Those who have seen it claim to hear a voice softly murmuring, "All stories are only dreams, not yet complete." And so the world slept again. The codex no longer writes, or perhaps it continues, through the dreams of those still listening to the night's whisper. There is no ending, only quiet continuation between sentences that never reach a period. In the stillness, the book waits for its next reader. Someone calm enough to understand that some secrets are not meant to be solved, only allowed to sleep beneath a light that never fades.